Welcome, everybody. I'm Katie McCammon, and I represent the 14 sponsoring organizations for tonight's forum. You can see them on the slide here. All the names and symbols are there. Please check them all out if you can. We, like you, care deeply about our community and planet, and we're delighted you've joined us to hear directly from the candidates about their plans for action on climate and environmental justice. A little bit of housekeeping. There will be closed captions in Spanish for any attendees who need it. The chat and Q&A are disabled tonight, so please just sit back and enjoy the discussion. And now I'm going to hand the mic to Paula Lee, our moderator for this evening.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the Climate Justice Forum for candidates running to be the next mayor of Sacramento. Tonight is a public forum, and it's sponsored, as you heard, by a coalition of over 14 climate justice organizations. And I'm Paula Lee, member of the League of Women Voters of Sacramento. I'll be the moderator. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit volunteer organization of women and men. Our mission is to encourage participation in government through education and advocacy, and we do not support or oppose or even evaluate candidates or political parties. However, we do take positions on public policy issues, including ballot measures and legislation. In that regard, we are a political organization. So if you're interested in helping make democracy work and public policy at any level of government, consider joining the Sacramento League, because we have active committees working on voter education and engagement, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, homelessness and housing, criminal justice, climate change, and ranked choice voting. Tonight, the questions were solicited in advance from the community and participating organizations. And the candidates here tonight in alphabetical order are Jose Avina, Flo Kofer, Steve Hansen, Kevin McCarty, and Richard Pan. Each candidate is going to make a 1.5-minute opening statement. And then they're going to have 1 minute to answer some questions and 1.5 minutes for some more detailed questions. Following that, they will be making a 1.5-minute closing statement. The League's timekeeper, we hope, is here, Patricia Pavone, and she'll let the candidates, or I will let the candidates know when they have 30 seconds left and when they have to stop. I'll rotate who answers first. So thank you, candidates, for running for mayor in the capital city and being here tonight to answer these questions about the current existential threat of climate change and how it intersects with other issues of concern here in Sacramento. We'll begin with an opening statement from, in reverse order, Richard Pan. Richard?
Thank you, and it's great being here with everyone tonight in this virtual forum to talk about climate justice. I'm thrilled to be running for mayor of Sacramento, and as a physician and public health expert, I've spent my life working to solve tough problems and to improve the lives of my patients and the community. I first ran for office because I saw the need for a type of leadership and problem solving that wasn't driven by politics or political agendas, but driven by a desire to create practical solutions rooted in facts. Leadership that would create policy that actually makes real tangible improvements in people's lives instead of kicking the can down the road. That's why I'm running for mayor of Sacramento. Our city is in crisis. We're facing a crisis of leadership that have let too many important issues like homelessness, housing, public safety spiral out of control. And we also have to deal with the climate crisis. We need leadership that will ask tough questions, dig into details, and create no-nonsense solutions that bring people together to get things done. That is who I am. That's what I've done throughout my entire career as a physician, public health expert, small business owner, and legislator. I'm going to bring a renewed focus on solving problems, not playing politics. I'm a problem solver. My only agenda is to get the city we all love back on track. Now, as a physician and public health expert, I have focused on the importance of what we call the social determinants of health, basically the environment and its impact on health. And that's why it's so important that our city also address the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next up is Kevin McCarty.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters and all our partners with climate justice tonight to talking about the race for mayor and such key issues, and no bigger issue to our future than the climate. So I love serving as Sacramento's assembly member. I've been in this position for 9 years, making a difference for my hometown on education, environmental issues, healthcare, smart criminal justice reforms. But I love more the city of Sacramento, which is why I'm leaning in to serve my hometown, bringing about practical solutions, proven ideas, and effective leadership to our biggest issues. Excited to talk about this issue tonight. Climate change. I've always been a big environmentalist. Twice have won awards from Sierra Club and ECOS as a leader of the year. But even more so now, I think about this issue through the lens of my 15-year-old daughters. I want to make sure that, we leave the planet better for them, but also we look at key issues right here in Sacramento, like our air quality, and bringing about real solutions. So you think about the bumper sticker over the years: act locally, act globally, think locally. That's what I will do as mayor, partner with our environmental champions, our leaders, and bring about sound solutions for our climate needs, and making sure when we focus on environmental issues, we focus on the communities that are always left behind in these discussions. So honored to be the mayor of Sacramento working on these climate issues, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Steve Hansen.
Well, good evening, everybody. I really appreciate the league and all our hosts tonight coming together to give us this opportunity to talk about not only our future, but climate. When I was a kid, I didn't know what I could be. My parents divorced when I was young, but really early, I decided that because I benefited from other people caring about me that didn't have to, I would try to give back. So even in my grade school, I started a paper recycling program. I tested the school's water for lead. I started my environmental career after watching Al Gore open that warm bottle of soda and saw how the dioxide, boiled over. And that's the analogy for our climate crisis. Way back then, we just haven't made enough progress. When I ran for city council, I prioritized making sure that we could build infill housing and continue to densify the already built up parts of the city and our region, like the SACOG blueprint called for. I helped bring bike share and safer streets with bike lanes, better walkability. I helped make sure, as chair of the air board, that whenever there was a significant pollution event like wildfires, that we partnered in one case with Assemblymember Kevin McCarty to pass new legislation. I care deeply about the climate, and that's why during the drought, I helped prioritize ensuring that the city accelerated our water meter project so we could lead instead of follow on water use. Being on the Climate Commission, making sure that all these other things that are going on in the city, that we meet our environmental goals. So thank you. I look forward to the conversation.
Candidates, I need to let you know where the timer is. She's up in one of those windows. I started to do it, but I need you to look up in one of those windows for Pat Pavone, who will show you the 30 seconds and the stop sign. Thanks. Next, Flo Koper. Flo?
Good evening, and thank you so much to the 14 organizations that have put on this forum this evening. My name is Dr. Flo Kofer, and I am a public health professional, and I'm running for mayor of Sacramento. And I'm running because, like so many of you, I am incredibly frustrated watching the conditions get worse across Sacramento. And I really do believe that we can do better. Both of my parents were public school teachers, and they taught me that we take care of each other. Anybody in our neighborhood knew that if they were applying to college, they could come and ring our doorbell and sit at our dining room table and get assistance with their applications. And when I was 11, we were at my aunt's birthday dinner, and my dad collapsed and died from heart disease. And my father protected everyone around him, but policies didn't exist to protect him. He started smoking when the tobacco lobby lied about the impact that that has on our health, saying cigarettes were good for us, and before we had smoke-free policies. And I don't want anybody else to experience what I did, so I became a public health professional to create policies to help us live long, healthy, happy lives. And that's what brought me to Sacramento 20 years ago to serve at the California Department of Public Health. And among the things that I've been able to do in my career in public health, I've worked on the Emergency Resilience Project. I'm the senior director for that, making sure that we have responses to some of the emergencies that are coming, because it's not a matter of if, but when. I also was appointed to the Mayor's Climate Commission to help us develop our city's climate action plan, because we understand that if we don't deal with the looming threat of climate change, we are going to make so many of the other issues in our communities, including homelessness, including joblessness, worse. And so I am running for mayor because I want to make sure that we have real progressive solutions to be able to address these challenges that are facing our city.
Thank you. And thank you to the tech people for getting the timer on there. Next up, for opening remarks, 1.5 minutes, Jose Avina.
Good evening, Sacramento. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the host. Thank you for the organizers. I appreciate you. But more importantly, I'd like to recognize the fact that we're not actually emitting any CO2 emissions right now with our vehicles being on the road. So I'm really happy to be on Zoom right now. One of the things that I also want to encourage you to is this is something I've been very passionate about for the past 10 years. I encourage you to go to Energy Upgrade and check out Real Heroes of California and see some of the things I've already done for this community, for the state, and for the United States as a whole. I've worked on different projects, not only here in Sacramento, but the state of California and throughout the world, trying to bring sustainability across to everyone, trying to reduce some of the costs that put onto the community and the human beings who can't afford electricity, water. There's some things that we could do to help bring these natural resources much closer to the person and actually reduce the costs. One of the other things I'd like to do during this time as well is listen closely to some of the things that the individuals are talking about, because these relate closely to some of the bigger issues we're trying to solve within this community. Homelessness, infrastructure, and preparing ourselves for natural disasters coming down the road, which will have an economic disaster if we don't plan for it accordingly. One last thing I'd like to leave you with is a quote that means a lot to me. A society grows old when old men, a society grows great when old men plant trees, the shade of which they know they'll never sit in. Remember that. That is something we're trying to do. We're trying to create a better world for the future generations to come. Thank you for participating tonight.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to questions. So we are going to begin with you, Jose. So keep it right there on Jose. First question. In 2019, the City Council adopted a resolution declaring a climate emergency, committing to carbon neutrality by 2045, and to accomplishing as much action as feasible by 2030. Would you modify these dates? And if so, how would you do it? Please explain your reasoning.
These goals have already been put out by experts. So the city and the state came down together and listened to some of the different panels and experts who said these are the timelines that we have to meet in order for us to get back to a point where I believe one of the organizations here as well, 350 parcels per million is one of the goals we're trying to reach, so that the atmosphere can allow for the natural heat from the earth to escape, so that we don't increase the current temperature in the Earth's core. That's important because it has global implications if we don't actually meet those goals. So I wouldn't do that because I'm not the expert in this field. I would listen to the experts, and if they advise me to do something differently, then I would then bring that information to the individuals who are going to make that plan and are actually going to vote on it. I myself am not the person that's going to create that. The city council members will come together and they will vote for that, but I will present the facts that they present me with.
Thank you. Flo Kofer, these answers are 1 minute.
As I mentioned, I served on our climate commission back in 2018 and 19. And so I am really well aware of the goals that we set out as a city. And one of the things that I think is really important is we should try to commit to moving those dates up, but certainly not back. So those dates were set in order to be able to set a really ambitious goal to be able to address carbon neutrality and taking as much action as we can, in the time frame that was allotted. But there's nothing stopping us from trying to see if we can move it faster. In fact, that would actually serve us quite well, because the sooner that we can achieve carbon neutrality, the less harm we're going to cause to our environment. And so one of the things I commit to as your next mayor is looking through every year when we set the priorities for the council and set the goals that we're going to work on, to be able to say, what can we do this year to be able to execute this plan? And is it possible for us to take on more so we can achieve it ahead of schedule?
Steve Hansen?
But my body of work on the city council is very clear in this matter. I got to vote on the climate crisis declaration. I'm very proud of it. I think we need to accelerate it. When I was on the council during the Trump administration, I was the person who signed the Under 2 MOU, which was a sub-national effort to get cities, counties, states across the country to dedicate to reducing our carbon emissions. There are so many things that have languished in the last few years. One of the greatest contributors to our climate crisis is the transportation sector. The collapse of bike share and other mobility options beyond driving has been a huge detriment. So I'd like to bring those things back to implement the climate commission's report, but 2035 should be our goal for significant action. The Volkswagen settlement that helped us get the Green City designation and $40 million to help accelerate electric vehicle charging. These are just the tip of the iceberg. We need to continue that work with the seriousness and effort that the crisis demands, and that means we have to do more.
Kevin McCarty?
Yeah, I'm fully in support of the plan the council adopted in 2019, as part of the state legislature when we put in motion our plan for the state of California, and it's all upon cities doing their share to step it up. We have to come to a reality that we're going into an era with the city budget issues, potentially $50 million shortfall next year. So what we really need is somebody who can partner with the state and federal partners. I'm proud that I brought over $50 million to Sacramento for American River Parkway to clean our air and other initiatives throughout the region. And I will use those skills as our mayor to partner with our state Senate and Assembly partners, with the governor, and with our congressional and U.S. Senate partners to bring home resources to Sacramento. Because talk is cheap. We can have an amazing climate action plan, as we noted earlier, but we need to focus on detailed implementation. So I think what I bring to the table is my experience being a former city council member, a city commissioner, a state lawmaker, knowing how to connect the dots and get things done. Because what we really want to make sure we tackle the climate issues going forward is effective leadership. And that's what I will bring to the table. And we need to, look outside of the box as far as ideas and opportunities for resources. But also, it's not that complicated. Focusing on housing, transportation, and adoption for clean energy. I will be focused on a laser on those three issues to make sure that we tackle our climate needs.
Richard Pan?
I too supported the city council's goal in 2019, and I too was serving in the legislature as well. And the legislature worked to help pass SB 32 and other pieces of legislation to ensure that our state is moving toward its climate goals. It's not just about setting goals; it's about actually achieving them. And that's what I bring is problem solving. We need to be sure that we do try to move as quickly as possible, but we have to set also realistic action that actually results in actual change. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, one of the things that I also will do is figure out how we're going to pull down resources from the state and the federal government as well. So, for example, when the city was in an economic budget crisis, which unfortunately looks like we are facing another facing a budget deficit going forward, I found resources to help support vital city services like firefighters, to be sure that we didn't have to close fire stations. I'm going to do the same for climate change. Thank you.
All right, next question. And we'll begin with Flo Kofer. Sacramento is getting hotter each summer with more and more longer heat waves. Other extreme impacts of climate change include flooding and stronger winter storms. These conditions impact our residents and especially our most vulnerable communities and the unhoused. How can the city do better in addressing these impacts for all residents of Sacramento?
This is an important public health question, and one that my sector has been raising for a very long time, because we recognize that extreme weather literally lessens people's life expectancy. When we have storms, people die. When we have extreme heat, people die. And so we understand how important this is and that we absolutely have to take action. And so some of the action we need to take is we need to make sure that there are not people sleeping on our streets, because when they are the most exposed to the elements. And what we know is that there's hot and cold stress that happens when you're experiencing the elements that actually can lead to you having hyperthermia or hypothermia a lot faster than one might expect. It doesn't take even the extremes to get there. And so every day people are experiencing a concept known as literal weathering, where their health is being harmed. And so it's a real commitment that we need to have to make sure that we are getting people inside as quickly as possible. And that's why we have a plan to make sure that housing is our number one issue, that we are fighting to make sure that people are protected in the immediate, short, and long term. And that's the best way to be able to address some of these challenges.
Steve Hansen.
There's no doubt our planet is warming. We just had one of the hottest years on record, and the city has to be prepared for adaptation and resilience. I'll give a few examples. One, we need to make sure that we're partnering with SMUD, drawing down money from the cap and trade funds to help people who are lower income seniors to make sure their homes are insulated, and then partner with the Tree Foundation as well. I used to serve on that board, and make sure we're planting trees. The heat island effect across our city is so profound. I mentioned earlier, while I was chair of the air board, I worked with our assembly member who's here right now, Kevin McCarty, because the wildfire smoke had inundated our region, and people outside who had to work didn't have an excuse to stay in. Our kids had to be outside. So we tried to increase the authority of our pollution control officer. Those things, along with stuff like making sure that we have less permeable pavement, we find ways for runoff to not go into streams to contribute to more flooding so we can absorb more of it. Recharge groundwater will be effective tools in leading this fight towards adaptation, where we can be more resilient and take care of those who are less fortunate. You know, for all of the great plans in the world, I've actually been working on these things on the council, and I want to continue that work with all of you.
Kevin McCarty.
Yeah, I think again, a lot of this comes down to implementation, and I concur with our prior answers here as far as what we need to do. But it's about bringing resources to the table to solve these problems. And I think what I offer at the table is somebody who knows how to work the levels of government, whether that's local level, being a former council member, serving as a state lawmaker, having relationships with the governor and my predecessor in the assembly, to my successor, excuse me, to make sure we bring home resources to challenge these, to work on our challenges. I do think there are simplistic things that we can do. If you look at some of the neighborhoods that are most challenged, they don't have the tree canopy. You go to Land Park in East Sac versus Meadowview in South Sac, it's not really complicated. Those neighborhoods are much more challenged, and so what can we do to focus on our urban canopy that we've already done in the city of trees? We can do more. I think that we need to look what's happening in the world as well and adapt. That's why Mr. Hansen brought up the bill that I authored. Sacramento a few years ago had the worst air in the world on those fire days, and we wrote a law to make sure we can have clean air policies.
Thank you, Richard Pan.
As a physician, I see firsthand what happens when we have adverse weather events, these severe weather events. It was mentioned before, and also as a public health expert, I know that while I can try to take care of them in the emergency room or the clinic, that the root causes requires action from a government. And that's also why I frankly ran for office for the first in the state legislature, why I'm running for mayor, because I see the impacts this has on real people in their lives as a physician. Frankly, as you mentioned in the question, there are too many of our fellow Sacramentans who are unhoused. They are completely exposed to the elements. And we need to be sure that we bring focus and effort and action to help those folks, people from becoming unhoused, and also people who are unhoused to get them housed. That is going to be one of my top priorities. And so I'm going to bring a relentless focus on that, because otherwise we have too many of our fellow Sacramentans suffering. Thank you.
And Jose Avina.
Like I said earlier, these are things that are affecting everyone. We talk about the homeless situation. We talk about our neighborhoods that are affected by, high interest and high rents and can't afford to live day to day. So looking at low-income weatherization programs and implementing them throughout our city, those are important to make sure that we actually get the individuals the AC units, the heating units, so that they can actually live appropriately. I went down to visit Camp Resolution yesterday, and great initiative, just really bad implementation of the program. They got the RVs, but they can't use the AC units or the heating. So the individuals are essentially roasting in there. And once summertime comes, we got to have a better plan for them. One of the other things, county rezoning areas. Let's look at the empty spaces. Let's look at ways where we can put in new housing units. But when we're doing these housing units, think about green spaces. Let's talk about some of the things that we could do to help reduce our carbon footprint while building new spaces as well. Other things we could do too is looking at maintenance of buildings that are existing right now to ensuring that they're as eco-friendly as possible, so we're not putting more strain on the power grid system. I'll stop.
Okay. This one, we're going to begin with Steve Hansen. Mayor Steinberg has proposed a countywide ballot measure that would establish a 1.5-cent sales tax for an integrated approach to affordable housing, safe and complete streets, transit, and climate innovations. Would you support such a measure in 2026? Why or why not?
Thank you. I know the mayor put this proposal on hold, and our sales tax right now is one of the highest, certainly in our region, as a regressive tax. I think we always have to make sure that when we ask people to raise revenue through a regressive tax, that it goes back into the most vulnerable people. There's no doubt in my mind, I'm a big proponent of complete streets, transit, that we need more matching funds to draw down the state and federal funds that we're just not getting right now. I know there's been a lot of talk about partnerships, but most of the state and federal grants require local match. So we do need to have this conversation as a county and a region. We also need a source of matching funds for housing. Right now, with the city's budget deficit and the state budget deficit, we're seeing the state claw back billions of dollars of money that were dedicated to affordable housing. As we work through these budget deficits, 2026 is around the corner, but I will lead these conversations to make sure that we get something that will meet the values of the city of Sacramento, but also can pass countywide.
Kevin McCarty.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of that measure. I know that the mayor was trying to put it on the 24 ballot this year. I don't think that's in the works. I think the big picture is that the Measure A failed last year because it didn't focus on what our true transportation needs are, as opposed to just building more roads and expressways around the region. If we want to address our climate issues and our air quality issues, it's very simple. Housing and transportation are so linked. And so I think that we should focus on a new transportation measure to focus on public transportation, light rail, bus rapid transit, but also focusing on how we could support and help subsidize housing projects that are on these lines, that are on vacant land next to our RT stations. And so that kills two birds with one stone, builds more affordable housing and focuses dealing with our climate change and really addresses that overall issue. So as mayor, I will bring leadership as the current mayor has done. and put this forward, whether it's in a Sacramento only measure or the region, the county. I'm currently, working with legislation on focusing on how you can have two adjacent cities like Elk Grove and Sacramento do it together. So there are a multitude of options, but the big picture again is we're in this together. And so I have a great relationship with our partners.
Kevin, continue that in the next question.
Yes.
Richard Pan.
Yeah, I admit that so the mayor's held this proposal back, and frankly, I think part of the reason for that is that people have lost confidence in the leadership of the city. For all, the voters will need to pass this, right? And I think the voters are very frustrated at that things aren't getting done in terms of addressing their top priorities, which is homelessness and public safety. And we're going to have to restore confidence in city leadership before we're going to be able to pass additional revenue. The other thing I would make note is that, as was mentioned before, sales tax is regressive. This is a climate justice forum. So yes, the people of lower income are disproportionately impacted by climate, but they also should not bear the disproportionate burden of paying for it. And so, we can certainly look at options, but first what needs to be done is the mayor needs to restore confidence in city government. And that's what I'll do, is be sure we take care of that first before we go back to the voters.
Jose Avina.
I'm going to agree with Dr. Pan on this one. We have to restore the confidence back in the voters. It's too often we spend taxes, or we pay the taxes, and we don't know where that money went. So we still need answers for some of the other things that's already happened. So before we even suggest taxing the taxpayers more again, let's think of other ways to solve this problem. Some of the big contributors to this problem in the first place were the corporations that put us here in the first place. So why not put that tax onto like Amazon, UPS, some of the bigger contributors to CO2 emissions downtown, right? They're forcing us to kind of use that traffic weight and reducing our urban sprawl, our urban bike lanes, so that we can reduce our carbon footprint within the cities. One of the other things we also have to think about is, with the economy going the direction it is, how can we afford to do this, right? So this is not something that we can go on and start taxing people more right now. I would encourage us to force the companies to look at other unique ways to become more sustainable so that we can meet this objective in terms of reducing our CO2 emissions. I believe that's the best way for us to attack this.
Flo Kofer.
I'm a corporate free candidate because it's really important to me that I represent people and not the interest of profit. And so one of the reasons why that's important to me is because I am frustrated, like many Sacramentans, at the way that the sales tax that was raised on us back in 2018 has not been spent the way we were promised. We were told it was going to be spent on affordable housing and homelessness, that it was going to be spent on inclusive economic development, and that it was going to be spent on the arts. And that was Measure U. And so we were getting in $70 million additional each year that we were promised to go to those, and it didn't. And so I do not want to go back to voters and ask them for more money when we haven't spent the last pot of money we asked them for responsibly or the way that we promised we would. And I absolutely agree that's a matter of trust with the voters. I absolutely agree that this is about, not taxing people with lower incomes and making them pay more in, but it's also a matter of integrity and trust. And I do not like to be in a position where we are saying one thing to people and then breaking that trust. And that is what, unfortunately, our city leadership has done. We have failed, and we cannot go back and ask for another handout before we do right.
Okay, Kevin McCarty. We'll begin with you with this question. And these next 4 questions, you have a little more time, a minute and a half, because you might need it, but you might not. And if you don't need it, don't take it, because we'll get in more questions that way. So, transportation is by far the greatest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in our region. It's critical that we improve our public transit system and increase ridership. What role do you see the city and mayor playing in making this happen? What type of innovative transit projects would you seek to prioritize? And please include your answer in your answer, the last time you used public transit.
All right. I last used public transit a few weeks ago, but I will say my teenage daughters use light rail today. They take it home from school. So our family uses public transportation on a regular basis. And look, I realize too that if we want to address our air quality and climate issues, we need to get off of fossil fuels and internal combustion engines and more public transportation. It's not just public transportation; it's complete streets. I think it's tragic that we see about people losing their lives kind of trying to ride their bike to work, and they're predominantly in lower income areas, as we saw in the B this weekend. So need to focus on not just public transportation, but alternative modes so people can get around Sacramento out of cars. It's not only good for public health, it's good for people's bottom line, their pocketbook, but also on our climate issues. But overall, the city has a major role in driving public transportation issues. I plan to be a big voice in making sure our RT board members are very engaged in making sure that we can focus on expanding public transportation options, not just light rail to the airport and to Elk Grove one day, but also immediate needs and what we can make sure that we have a sustainable public transportation system. And again, this really dictates us to have partners with the federal and state level and our county partners. And I'll use these relationships and skills to deliver resources for Sacramento.
Richard Pan.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, before I lived in Sacramento, I actually did my medical training over in Boston. And the great thing about living in Boston was that I didn't need to have a car. In fact, I took public transit every day to work, to go, get my groceries, everything else. And frankly, when I moved to Sacramento, I was kind of disappointed that the public transit system was not certainly robust enough to allow that to happen. That the only way to effectively get to places was with a car. And part of that's not just the routes. We do have routes, but frequency as well. I always say that when public transit requires you to look at a schedule, then the people who have to ride it will ride it, and the people who don't have to won't. Right. So it is about investing in our public transit, being sure we have the density and the frequency. One of the things I tried to do as a state legislator was actually to try to get the state to not just get discounted, public transit for the member, for their employees, but also, for example, I mean, it gets hot. We talked about heat. Well, it gets hot here in Sacramento, and yet, we should be investing into better, stations with more shade and so forth, so that people are more comfortable as well. The other thing that we should look at as a city, certainly when it comes to transit, but it's not so much transit, it's land use, right? It's the need for transit depends on where things are, where you are in the relation to your location, to your job, to where you shop, to et cetera. So certainly one of the important focuses will also be on land use decisions in terms of people being able to live close to the things that they need so that they don't have to drive, and they can actually walk or use other alternatives. Thank you.
Jose Avina.
Well, I actually don't own a vehicle, so I live within a 1 mile radius. I get to, I go to work and I live at home, and my grocery store is all within a 1 mile radius. I'll use my scooter, or I'll use a line bike to get to where I need to go. One of the other things that makes the city so great is the accessibility to the public transportation in the downtown sector, though. One of the big problems we have is that throughout the rest of the city, we're kind of lacking, but we also have some ideas, and I've read some of the things that Sacramento is trying to do, and trying to create a greater transportation system so that the other parts of the city can actually get from point A to point B without having to rely on a vehicle. One of the other things I'd also do is challenge the corporations to think of more unique, sustainable methods to get the shipping item to you. I challenge them to look at drones. That's a great way for us to alleviate the roadways and allow us to keep emissions from getting into the air, and because they utilize battery systems, right? And also we can even reduce theft, maybe, if we can find a way to box that. One of the other ways I'd like to implement this is working with the transportation system to create more bus routes, but smaller buses, more utilizing maybe 8 to 10 passenger buses, reducing that footprint on the roads as well, and actually opening up with the bus stop areas as well. That's all I have at this moment.
Flo Kofer.
Transit is so incredibly important to our region, and it's one of the reasons why I supported then Council Member Jay Shanier's proposal to be able to expand transit and make it free for kids in K to 12. So one of the best ways to be able to encourage people to ride it is for it to be something that we provide at low or no cost, and we should be really trying to expand that, moving to our community college and university students next, getting more young people to ride transit because they can become lifelong transit riders, and also making sure our elders have access to it, especially when we may get to ages where driving is no longer safe or convenient. But beyond that, we need to think about the routes and the access and the time frames. I take transit regularly to Kings games and to events at Golden One, and I have found that sometimes I come outside afterwards and the light rail has already stopped running, and we're not keeping it running during major events. How are we expecting people to want to rely on it? I got stranded there after the Lizzo concert because the light rail had stopped running. So we really need to look and make sure that it's convenient for people, that when they get on it, they can actually get where they're going and get back reasonably, and that it can become something that people can rely on. Because if it's not convenient, if it's a hassle, it won't allow people who don't have to rely on it to rely on it. And we need more people to opt in. We also need to make sure it works for the people who are relying on public transit, so more people will. And so that it doesn't become something just that low income people are using because they don't have a car. It actually becomes something that we don't have because it's better for our environment and we can use it successfully. And so that's the way to be able to address transit, is make it useful and make it low cost.
Steve Hansen.
For transit and transportation, we have to have an all the above conversation where not just public transportation, which I'm very proud of my service on the RT board. When I joined the organization, it was in a downward spiral. We stopped that, we turned it around, and we've been able to grow our services through innovative programs. I helped with Jay Chenier to implement the idea that kids in high school and below ride for free. I'd like to expand that to our community college and college students going to public university in our region. I helped work with the city of Davis, West Sacramento, and the city of Sacramento through SACOG to launch our shared mobility program. Our jump system before the pandemic hit was as successful as the city of Paris. And what happened, though, is after it was sold to Uber and then Lime, disinvestment happened. We need to get back to likely a publicly owned system where we have connectivity. We implemented the small mobility buses to make sure that microtransit was available throughout the region. We did all kinds of other things, not just through regional transit, new low floor cars, double tracking, but on the Capital Corridor Board and working with San Joaquin's, making sure that intercity rail would help reduce our carbon impact by people passing through. So you could take the train to get to and from Sacramento from the Valley or the Bay. There's so many different things that we are doing that we have to continue to do.
Thanks. Okay, we begin this question with Richard Pan. The Mayor's Climate Commission completed its work in 2020 and provided comprehensive recommendations for achieving carbon zero by 2045. Many of these recommendations are included in the city's proposed climate action and adaptation plan, which is scheduled for adoption this spring. The proposed plan has a price tag of over $3 billion, yet the city does not have funding set aside for this purpose. What would you do to ensure that funding and financing are addressed in a meaningful way so that the plan does not sit on the shelf?
Well, that's a great question, because too often we come up with plans and that we don't necessarily have the financing for. I think, first of all, I'm someone who has been able to be creative and innovative in looking at opportunities to get more funding. As I mentioned, during the Great Recession, when the city was at a deficit and the state was in a tremendous deficit, I got funding to help keep fire stations open, right? I'm getting funding, leveraging federal funding to help provide housing navigation and rental subsidies for people who are homeless. And certainly the climate crisis, while we need to certainly do our part, we are part of a larger whole with our state, our country, and in the world. And we should be looking at opportunities to leverage funding from state efforts. For example, we have potential funding from the auctions from the greenhouse gases. We also have federal opportunities as well. But I also think this action plan, certainly provides guidance for us and when we go to different entities, not just government, as well as we should be talking to our employers. One of the things I should also make note is that the state of California as an entity is actually our largest employer and landowner. And we need the state of California to help step up for us here in Sacramento as that preeminent entity, to be sure that they're helping us achieve the climate goals that we need for our city. Thank you.
Jose Avina.
The state of California is the fifth largest economy in the entire world. There is no reason why we shouldn't be leading the charge in innovation and sustainability. There are other ways for us to achieve this without nickel and diming the taxpayer to get more money out of them so that we can achieve these goals. Some of the ways that I've read, from the climate action plan is, bus stops. You can look at bus stops and create, living gardens so that you can attract bees and provide shade for the individuals sitting under there. Like there are unique ways for us to find solutions to this problem, and, working towards that goal, even without the financing, that's totally fine. But we can look at the current policies that we have in place and look at some of the things that no longer make sense, like water capture. Why isn't it that the individual can no longer capture the water? Why is it that Nestle has the rights to the waterway, right? That water is, coming from, natural resources. So that's something that we can look at, hopefully reducing, utility costs for the individual, but also, allowing the individual to use that water to plant, gardens within. Other things that we could do is small micro gardens within the individual's community. And that would also reduce the amount of times they have to run to and from the grocery store. So there are other ways that we can look at this in creative manners to achieve the overall goal, but without having to go and actually start spending more money. So I encourage people to start looking at unique, innovative solutions and not trying to just send another dollar round to the corporations.
Flo Kofer.
$3 billion is intimidating, right? Especially when we have a $1.6 billion, annual budget, and some of that is part of our funds that are set aside to be able to do our general business. And so what it will require from us is being able to look at that plan and talk about implementation and decide which pieces of this are we going to work on this year so we can set a goal and figure out also where we should start. Because very similar to what would happen if we were thinking about paying down, a bunch of credit card debt. You might start with the highest interest one. And if you pay that down, then you can roll those savings over somewhere else. And we could apply something very similar here. What are the major investments we need to make now so that they will both save us money as well as yield us dividends? So we can take those dollars that are reinvested back into our community and roll them over into the next set of goals that we need to achieve. We also need to be looking at state and federal match funds. The city has not always been great about drawing those down when we're eligible, and we should. And finally, we need to look at partnership. This is a city where 30,000 people wake up early on Thanksgiving morning to participate in Run to Feed the Hungry to support the food bank. This is a community of people who care. And if we set some goals together and say, this is what we're working on, I can guarantee you that our business community will show up, that our nonprofits will show up, that our unions will show up, that our neighborhoods will show up, neighborhood associations will show up, and that our community members will show up and say, here's how we can help in ways that government may not be able to imagine. So we need to see them as our partners in solutions instead of adversaries that we're navigating around. And that'll be the way that we'll get to $3 billion a lot faster than we may have hoped.
Steve Hansen.
The truth of the matter is we're so proud of being the state capital, but the state has largely abandoned the city of Sacramento when it comes to funding programs, not just housing, but all of our climate programs. And part of that is I was on the Climate Commission. I helped make sure that we adopted that plan. I've served as chair of the former local government commission, now Civic Well. I hope as mayor to be a part of climate mayors, because there are trillions of dollars in federal funds and state funds that we're just not fighting for. $3 billion is not intimidating, especially if you look at an action plan on a timeline of here to 2030 or here to 2035. We can break that down and have a sources and uses plan to really implement what we need. But it starts with having a ferocious desire to get the money, and we have to advocate for what we want. The state tends to fund things on the coast, and the programs that have been written by the legislature for these, they don't allow the money from cap and trade to really come to Sacramento. We need to make sure that our city is fighting at the legislature, fighting at the Strategic Growth Council and all of these agencies. So transit, housing, air quality, water, that we're funding all of those the best we can, and we're leveraging those state and federal funds. And we have just been way too facile and too docile in having those conversations.
Kevin McCarty.
Yeah, we need to make sure we draw down resources from others. And, I was at President Biden signing the infrastructure bill in 2021, and I'll make sure we can help draw down those resources for Sacramento where our time is right. We also need to work with partners like SMUD and help make sure we have rebate programs to help entrepreneurial homeowners to do their part. But it's not always easy. Give you an example. I recently had to get a new hot water heater, and I looked what it cost for the old time, the gas one versus the 10 times more with a rebate program. And so we can't always count on homeowners and residents to do their part unless we're making it easier for them to do it as well. Some people want to save the planet. Most people want to save a little bit of money. And if they can't save the planet in the meantime, they'll do both. So we need to make sure that we help individuals part of this equation as well. I concur with our two prior panelists when they talked about looking at the lowest hanging fruit as well. These are very daunting issues to address, very, very expensive. We don't have a lot of money in the general fund, especially with a looming budget deficit. So what I would do is work with our partners, work with the 15 groups here on this presentation tonight, and come up with some of the real strategic and realistic opportunities to make a difference now.
Okay, this question we begin with Jose Avina. Sprawl development continues throughout the region and contributes to increased vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. For example, just one example, massive development is proposed for the Natomas Basin north of downtown. What is your view on annexing city and county boundaries to facilitate this type of development? How do you balance the arguments that these developments would create new jobs and bring in revenue with the need to prevent further emissions, producing sprawl and encourage infill and urban development? That's why you need a minute and a half.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, it's important for us to invest in our economies and bring new opportunities to each location or city. One of the things that we don't always necessarily look at is what is the strain that this is going to put not only on our power grid system, but also on the transportation and on the roadways. The infrastructure already, as it goes, is already suffering. And as the climate continues to worsen, we're constantly battling, trying to keep up with patchwork. So if we have more individuals coming into this community, which are welcome always, we have to think about the infrastructure as a whole too. Are we prepared, and have we invested properly to ensure that the roadways are prepared to handle this increased flow of traffic? And not only how is that going to affect our carbon emission goals at the very end? So I would encourage that the developers, as they come in, taking into consideration some of the concerns that we as a community have already said, hey, these are the things that we're trying to achieve. And we need you, the developer, to understand that you work for us. You're coming here, you're taking taxpayer money, and you need to achieve some of these goals for us and helping that. So it is important that there is communication all across the board with the various different agencies. But when they're going to build, that they're thinking of all the different possibilities, and they're making it as sustainable as possible. But also, let's look at some of the ancient civilizations and what they did. They realized that in order for them to become more efficient, they needed to create smaller communities, something similar to the Spanish square.
Thank you, Flo Kofer.
I love this question following the last one because I think it speaks to so many people's frustrations with government. We can't come up with a climate action plan and then immediately talk about violating it. So one of the things that's included in our climate action plan is a prioritization of infill development, in part because we want to make sure that we are developing housing and we are building near existing infrastructure so that we're not increasing emissions. So it has to be our priority to then implement the plan that we have spent years working on. And as someone who served on that commission, it would be, and that had people from across our region coming together, including from West Sacramento, because it was the Joint Mayor's Climate Commission. I just want to be able to say, no, we do not want to start building in places where we already have trouble with transit. That does not make sense. We need to prioritize building in places where we have our lines already run, where we already have bus service going, where people can access the things they're going to, not where we are creating another car-centric community that then we have to service. And so that goes against our climate goals. And since it hasn't already been done, it is incredibly important for us to hold true to our values. When we set a plan, we have to implement that plan, but we also have to use that as our guide, as our values, to make sure that we don't immediately go and approve over here in a silo another plan that's going to violate the basic principles that we just laid out and that we said are good for our health.
Steve Hansen.
I'm a full bore YIMBY when it comes to these things. Some of the reason that we keep sprawling out is that it's been so hard to build in infill areas. SACOG passed the blueprint in 2006. When I took office in 2012, the barriers to entitlement were so high. So a lot of the work that I did was to prioritize repopulating the city, lowering the barriers, doing infill development. We passed a TOD ordinance. We waived fees on affordable housing. On projects that used to take sometimes years to get approved, we could then, especially affordable housing, get them approved in 6 weeks. This is life-changing, not just for our residents, but for our climate. And we need to continue our pro-housing work. We did get the first pro-housing designation in the state. And so when it comes to the conversation about our region, we have a dynamic region. We have a growing region. Working with Yolo County, our other sister cities in Sacramento County, Placer and El Dorado, we have to make sure that growth is directed into built out areas, but also it's a reflection on the extreme costs and the NIMBY attitude of a lot of the Bay Area cities that continue to refuse to build housing, fight with the state, fight against what's best for the communities, and people are relocating here. We need to make sure that we're doing our part, but we also need to continue to encourage state level policies that support housing at all levels of affordability. And in our city, continue to work with the partners around us to make sure that the growth is targeted towards those infill areas where it can make the most impact economically, socially, and buttress those other systems. Transit, which we talked a lot about, making sure we're in SMUD territory so our electricity is green. SMUD is one of the best utilities in the country. And so we have a real opportunity here to continue to lead on housing. I'm sorry, Paula, was that funny?
No, you weren't watching the stop sign.
Oh, she's not popping up on my screen.
Oh, okay.
So
sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's the deficiency sometimes of Zoom. Sorry. Kevin McCarty.
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I can certainly repeat that question. Just a minute. It was a long one. But it was a good one. Okay. Sprawl development continues throughout the region and contributes to increased vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. For example, massive development is proposed for the Natomas Basin north of downtown. What is your view on annexing city and county boundaries to facilitate this type of development? How do you balance the arguments that these developments would create new jobs and bring in revenue with the need to prevent further emissions, producing sprawl and encourage infill and urban development?
Yeah, this goes back to our climate issues. If we want to focus on those jointly, it's about infill development. So I'm all for that. But the crux of this issue is what to do with this project out there on North Natomas. I'm very familiar with it. We passed a joint vision when I was on the city council, and so I'm kind of torn because you look at there's building up in Plumas Lake or Yuba City, way on the outskirts, and North Natomas is in the city core. So I supported the Greenbrier project. Valley View Acres is under construction over there in the Thomas area as well. But this one is very key because when we develop those plans, and you ask our former mayor Heather Fargill, she'll remind you that our habitat plan up there was based upon X amount of land for our endangered species and our habitat. And so, ignoring that would throw that all in question, the entire plan that we have up there. So I think we need to be very mindful of supporting development on the outskirts of the city, but also focusing on our true, locked in plan to protect our habitat up there. And so this is one that I think that is not an either or, but it needs plenty of discussion. But big picture, we need to focus on removing barriers and make it easier for infill developments like we've seen here in our central city. And we have plenty of opportunity sites throughout the city of Sacramento that we need to zero in on.
And Richard Pan.
Well, we have a housing shortage. And as mentioned, we have people coming here to Sacramento. And so one of our challenges is that where's the housing going to get built? And so this is where, if we want to stop sprawl, we have to make it easier, or at least as easy to build infill housing as it is to build out. And as mentioned by previous speaker, even if we quote stop expansion in our borders, immediately over our border will rise another development, right? So we're not going to end sprawl by simply limiting the construction of housing within the city of Sacramento. So we have to do more to try to be sure that we promote infill development, that we take down barriers to infill development. As a legislature, I work with SACOG to get funding for Green Means Go to help build out infrastructure that would actually facilitate infill development. We got to look at how, what are those barriers? So when we think about, people who actually try to develop infill, it should not be harder than it is to then basically go out and build in a new track. And then the other part is, as I mentioned earlier, is that certainly as we're looking at any form of development, right? When you talk about climate change and climate justice, we need to think about how we guide development in a way so that people don't need to have to travel far, right? That so some of that's infill itself, but some of that's also being strategic about what the development that we do allow in the city of Sacramento. Thank you.
Jose Avina.
Excuse me, ma'am. I do believe I started with that question.
Oh, you started. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay. Flo. Let's see, we're on. Again, you have 1.5 minutes on this one. Active transportation options. Walking, cycling, and rolling play an important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well as improving health and quality of life. Safety is a reason often cited for not using these options. What can the city do to improve safety, provide additional opportunities, and encourage and incentivize active transportation?
I love this question because the very first commission that I served on for the city of Sacramento was the Active Transportation Commission. And so we were thinking about this question a lot about, and I joined because I was riding my little turquoise bike around town and I was noticing that all of a sudden the bike lane disappeared and I was left to fend for myself with cars going 45 miles per hour. Or suddenly cars couldn't see me. And one day I was actually hit while a car was pulling out of a parking space because I was on the outside of the cars. And so there are design features that we can actually implement to be able to make it safer for people to walk, for people to bike throughout our community, and make it so it's not quite so car centric. Because when we do that, we make it seem as if the entity that should be using the road is the car and everyone else is an afterthought. And when we're an afterthought, it means that the design really isn't serving us. And so we have people in our community who are experiencing disabilities. We have people in our community who are biking and who are walking, and we want to make sure that they're safe. Because right now, what's happening is that 14% of our roadways are responsible for 79% of the accidents where someone is killed or severely injured. We don't want to see that continue to happen. So we need to be looking for ways that we can make sure we have protected bike lanes, that our sidewalks are adequate, and that when we're having construction, we're prioritizing the continued use of bikes and pedestrians and not cars. Because when we do that, we are signaling from our environment who the priority is and that their safety is paramount.
Steve Hansen. You're muted, Steve.
Sorry. Thank you, Paula. As a 20-year resident of the grid, I spent a lot of time enjoying the biking, walking of the grid, but also creating the parking protected bike lanes, making sure that people could walk safely. And when I joined the council, nobody else cared about biking and walking. And so I really fought to reshape the old City County Bicycle Advisory Committee that really didn't connect our disadvantaged communities to our city staff very well. So we rebuilt it as the Active Transportation Commission, which you just heard Ms. Flo, Dr. Kofer served on. I brought forward Vision Zero because we learned that a lot of the fatalities and injuries in our city were in our disadvantaged communities. That was one of the policies that I fought for at the city council and continues to be a North Star for us to achieve. But the costs of making sure that we continue that progress mean that we have to leverage state and federal funds. But we also have to continue to ensure that our regional partners, whether it's STA, which is a major funding entity, SACOG, the Air District, and others, are also helping us draw down those state and federal funds, and also making sure that we are leading the way and making sure that our communities are not just bikeable and walkable, but it's safe to even drive. Too often we see dangerous intersections that need to be redesigned and the city languishes. I am very excited to get to work in rebuilding our streets so they're safe for everyone.
Kevin McCarty.
Yeah, you learn a lot from our youth. I learned a few years ago driving my kids around Sacramento. They said, "Dad, why do some of these bikes over here? Why are they painted white and locked to a street pole?" And I had to tell them that somebody died there. If you look this past weekend, the Sacramento Bee talked about the most dangerous locations. They're all in low income neighborhoods. And these are communities that people, but for their bike, can't get to work, can't get to their appointments. And so, we owe it to make sure we focus on our climate, but also justice and equity to make sure we focus on these issues. Twice in my career, I have gotten $5 million and a $3 million earmark to redo an intersection after somebody died, and that should I'm saddened by that because we need to do it beforehand, before we lose a life. And so, some of these fixes aren't that complicated. We learned that the one over there on Broadway and MOK in Oak Park, it was a $60,000 fix. And so we need to prioritize the ones we can address now. But this is about drawing down our resources from our state and federal partners to make sure we have complete streets. And I literally bike, walk, and roll. I have a longboard. You may see me around my neighborhood. I walk and I ride my bike. So I understand this issue is first and foremost. And when I go to other cities, I see what they've done, Portland and New York and, cities that have really stepped up and made their grid more pedestrian and bike friendly. And I think, Sacramento, we're leading on so many issues, but we're not doing enough. I like what we've done in the Central City the last few years. We need to step it up and do those throughout the city of Sacramento, especially issues that are neighborhoods that are forgotten.
Richard Pan.
First of all, I want to agree with what the previous speaker said. We initially built our transportation infrastructure, built environment in a way to facilitate cars. It's made it dangerous for pedestrians. As a pediatrician and someone who actually, I was a medical consultant for the school district. We're trying to get kids to walk more, to more physical activity, address obesity and so forth. And so we certainly need to address those built environment issues. But the other thing we also need to deal with is we need to restore order to our public spaces. All right. So, we have sidewalks, but it's hard to navigate them because we have people camping out on them. I mean, and so if you're on a wheelchair, we have that, or even if you're just walking, that's a problem. When people are afraid to walk in our, go to parks, that's a problem. And so, yes, we need to invest and and build out our infrastructure, but we also need to be sure we have order in our public spaces so people feel safe, and they feel safe being able to walk to the places they want to go, whether it's to a park, to a school, to a restaurant, and that includes, of course, not just downtown, but also in all parts of the city. So that's why I'm going to bring relentless focus in trying to be sure that we address our homeless issue and our public safety issues, and be sure we address the blight, we address that's happening in our city, that we address people's sense of safety, because we're not going to have people engaging in active transportation if they don't feel safe doing so. Thank you.
Jose Avina.
I love this question because I ride my bike everywhere when I used to be in college. So, and I'd come to downtown and I would feel threatened on the bikeway because it's dark, right? And you can't see. So, crime prevention through environmental design. What I mean by that is looking at the environment around us and encouraging individuals to go out there and participate and partake in their local environment, but knowing that they're safe. LED lights to light the bikeway, little kiosk centers in case that for some reason there's an emergency, they can quickly get in contact with emergency responders. Those are some things you could do. Other things we could do is looking at empty spaces within the city buildings downtown and throughout the city, and making them green spaces, right? Encouraging people to find areas that are not being utilized appropriately, right? And let's take advantage of some of those areas and let's create livable gardens where people are encouraged to now go and sit in and create a community. It is science. It is a known fact that it is looking at plants. It is good for your mental health, right? And we talk about mental health issues throughout this entire forum for the past, month. And, it's one of the biggest things affecting our community. So why not do something to improve that? Right? We have the most beautiful scenic routes throughout the entire state of California. And this is why I call this place home. And it's because I love taking my bike or the scooter and enjoying the bike path. But there is at points where it is dangerous. So we need to reassure the community that it is safe to get out there and invest in the youth and encourage them to get out there and love this.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Now it's time for closing statements. And we are going to give you a minute and a half. And I want to make sure you have this addition to the closing statement that you have for yourself. And that is, the coalition would like you to please incorporate the following into your comments for your closing statement. And that's why you have a minute and a half. What 2 climate initiatives do you commit to undertaking in your first 3 months as mayor? And we're beginning the statements with Steve Hansen. You're muted, Steve.
You'd think by now I'd figure that out. Well, thank you everyone for your attention tonight. And I appreciate our hosts. Sacramento's at a crossroads. Our city has done a lot of good work, but we have so much left to do. This is our city and it's our future. And so as much as we may not be happy with the way things are now, we have a chance with a mayoral election to pick who's going to lead us into the future. And my record on climate is practical and it's gotten a lot done, whether on housing, on transit, on water, on air quality. And I want to continue that work as your mayor because Sacramento is a city that is going to be terribly impacted by the continued crisis on our planet. As mayor, in the first 3 months, I'm going to bring back a robust community bike share program that is city owned or regionally owned because it is essential to connect to transit and to give people mobility options. Second, I'm going to make sure that we continue to reform our building processes through policies that can encourage affordable housing development and housing at all levels of affordability. I want to make sure too that our air quality is always prioritized and making sure that with the air district, we're continuing to make sure our disadvantaged communities have access to trees, to air quality monitors, and the public health they deserve. Vote for me, join me, Steve Hansen, steveforsacramento.com.
Thank you, Kevin McCarty.
I'm excited to run for Sacramento to move my city forward. I'm proud of the campaign that I'm running. I serve as your assembly member. I'm proud to have the endorsement of our other Sacramento assembly member, dozens of neighborhood leaders, environmentalists, community leaders, our firefighters, our labor leaders, knowing that I can get stuff done. I'm a proven problem solver. After the pandemic, when the downtown died, I wrote the law that turned, lemons into lemonade, utilizing underutilized state buildings into housing. We're now going to have 500 housing units at Capitol Mall. When the Parkway was in peril, or American River Parkway, I wrote a law creating to make it a state conservancy. I've now drawn over $45 million on the Jewel of Sacramento, one of our environmental treasures. I'll do just that as mayor. My top 2 environmental priorities going as my first few months in office will be focusing on how we can build more housing. If you want to have more infill, if we want more infill housing, we can address affordability, but also dealing with our climate issues as well. So I will put together a blue ribbon commission, bringing in, policy experts, our planners, our building industry people, and focus on how we can remove barriers because time is money with the city to develop projects. I'm really, as I mentioned earlier, really heartened by these stories and saddened really about the deaths of people on our streets. So focusing on complete streets and making our city more bike and pedestrian friendly.
Thank you, Jose Avina.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the host. Thank you to everyone watching. And again, I'm glad that we didn't write our cards today. We saved a lot of emissions. One of the things that is important to me and for everyone to understand is that sustainability isn't just a promise. It's something we have to do. We don't have an option. There is no plan B. This is the only planet that we have. If we don't invest all our time and energy into solving this issue, there won't be a planet or home to leave to our children. So I would encourage everyone not to just focus on one or two, focus on all of them. Work with the experts, bring them in, and let's pick up where they left off and give them the tools necessary to start now going out there and implementing these plans. And let's create a cleaner and sustainable city for everyone. One of the things that I've also want to leave you with as well is I've gotten a lot of comments and interests is I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I represent you, the people. I work for you. I don't work for anybody else, not an organization. I represent the people of the United States and this community. So I don't have any left-leaning or right-leaning views. I listen to the facts. I make my own assessments. Sometimes they may not seem as if they're the views of the community, but I believe in factual information, and I will make the best judgment provided with the facts that are given to me. The other thing is leadership through example. I'm not going to tell you about what I am going to do. I'm going to tell you about the things I've already done. Look at the facts. Look at the things I've done in the past, and I'll continue to do those today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Richard Pan.
Thank you so very much for holding this forum, and it's great to have this opportunity to talk to people about this very important issue of the climate crisis. The city of Sacramento is an amazing city. We have so much potential. We're one of the most diverse cities in the whole country. We're the capital of the largest state and the largest economy in the country, and one of the largest in the world. And we put our minds to it and we work together. There's nothing we cannot accomplish. But yet our city is in crisis. We have a crisis in leadership. People are frustrated that there's not enough follow through, that basically there's a lot of talk and not enough action. And that's why I'm running for mayor, because it's time for less talk, more action. And I bring that record of getting things done. I want to talk in terms of my priorities. Well, first of all, I would say in terms of climate, first of all, of course, we need more housing, and that particularly infill housing. So we're going to immediately be acting on trying to facilitate and take down the bureaucratic barriers to building infill housing. Right. As I said, we need to make sure that building infill housing is also as easy as building anywhere else, if not easier. The other thing is we want to promote active transportation. Well, how do we do that? Well, first of all, the more immediate thing we need to do is we need to be sure we have a responsive city. When people feel like they're unsafe on the streets, we need to have a city that responds. Basically, people need to know that there's going to be order in public spaces. We're going to take care of the blight. People are going to be able to walk about their neighborhoods and feel safe about it. I have a record of delivering. As I when I first ran for the legislature, the state had a $28 billion deficit. There was a news report saying that we're ungovernable. By the time I left the legislature, we had a $30 billion reserve. So I can take care of tractable problems. We're going to get it done. Please vote. I appreciate your vote for mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Flo Kaufer.
Thank you so much to the organizers for tonight's forum. You know, Sacramento is a really amazing city filled with some wonderful people, but it's also in crisis right now. And in addition to the housing crisis that is only outdone by New York and Los Angeles, we also are, along with the rest of our planet, facing a climate crisis. And so for those reasons, we really need new leadership that's not going to give us the status quo and repeat what's already been done, but is actually going to be looking for innovation. Not only am I a scientist and a public health professional, but I've actually built coalitions before. I've done this work without having the benefit of being able to vote. I've advocated. I've worked with our city partners and our county partners. I've served on 5 different boards, committees, and commissions, and I've actually passed policy to be able to improve our environment and to be able to serve our communities. And I firmly believe that we can do so much better than what we've already done because our problems are decisions. And we truly need to stop choosing a reality that doesn't serve us. So in the first 100 days, I commit to doing 2 things. First, I want to make sure that we set some priorities for the city of Sacramento that include our climate goals. And we're going to take action every year to make sure that we are expending a portion of our budget to achieve them. And the second is that I want to make sure that we actually have a standing committee on climate where we have community members who are helping us figure out new and innovative ways to continue that process. Because there are so many ways that we can use our focus on climate to be able to be economic development, to be able to enrich our region, and to truly be able to serve the community that we love. So I invite you to go to flowformayor.com and join our movement.
Oh, thank you, candidates. Thank you so much for running for public office and for meeting with the community tonight on this really important issue. We're also really grateful to the Climate Coalition for putting this together. I think it's really been a very interesting forum. And as a reminder, the ballots go out in 2 weeks from today. So register or re-register if you have moved or if your name or your signature has changed. And please encourage others that you know to do the same. You can find your ballot now, right now, online at vote411.org. And you can learn more about these candidates and other candidates on your ballot there too. The League knows that there is an enormous amount of money spent on elections to communicate with voters. And so vote411.org is our contribution to help with that, because it's a free resource for candidates to communicate with you, the voters. And so we encourage the candidates to go there and put up their information, their endorsements, any links to news articles about them, anything they want to do to communicate with you, and it's all free. You can type in your address right now at vote411.org and see your ballot. And there's no need to wait until election day. After you get that ballot, you don't have to wait until March 5th to drop or mail in your ballot. So good night, everyone. You're now a more informed voter as a result of this forum. So go spread the word. Good night.